Well, today I have the opportunity to give a Bible study, and I've chosen to cover Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. I believe in Numbers 13 there's quite a bit of good information that is helpful to us in many ways. It's helpful to us probably in every situation in life. I believe there's a principle here that can help us in our families, on our job, in our neighborhood, in a congregation, in a community. I believe the information is very powerful, and so I wanted to spend the time covering the information in Numbers chapter 13. I have given sermons and or Bible studies about this using the expression, recognize the negative and dwell on positive. So that expression you've heard from many other people, but you've certainly heard it from myself quite often, recognize negative and dwell on positive. And that's, I think, one of the great lessons we see in Numbers chapter 13. Unfortunately, we learn it from their bad example, because many times we learn things from bad examples. It is nice to learn from good examples, but sometimes we learn from bad examples. I remember a long time ago, it's just a frivolous thing, we were playing softball, and one fellow started stating an opinion about the softball tournament. I don't want to go into all the details, not important. But I looked at the way he was describing his perspective, and I thought, that's what I say sometimes, and it doesn't look very good. And so I actually learned from his bad example. I thought, by seeing how he looked, I thought, if I look that way, I don't want to be that way. And all of us, I know I can think of many examples, and so could you. You can think of many examples where you see someone and think, if I look like that, that's not a good look. If I look like that, then I'm wrong. If I believe like that, then I'm in error. And so that's what we're going to learn from Numbers 13. There's certainly a good example mentioned in Numbers 13, but there is a bad example and that we can learn from. So again, Numbers chapter 13, if you turn there, let's begin by reading. Let's learn the lesson here of their mistake and how we can do it the right way. Hopefully we can be like Caleb instead of the rest of the crowd. Numbers 13, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the children of Israel. Take someone from each tribe of their fathers, send a man, everyone a leader among you. So they wanted to represent all the tribes, and when they represented those tribes, they picked someone. So that's what God said to Moses. So verse 3, Moses sent to all the tribes of Israel, the children of Israel, and he said, pick somebody. So I'm not going to read verses 4 through 15. Talks about the names of the people who are picked. You can see those. And by the way, as I've mentioned, I'm sure when I mention these two good examples of reading, I'm going to forget somebody, so please forgive me if I forget you. But when Reg Killingly read in my sermon during the Days of Unleavened Bread, when he read the prodigal son story, I just really loved the way he read that. And when Ron Avey reads many weeks, I love the way some people are skilled readers. And just because I didn't mention your name doesn't mean you're not a good reader, but I'm 67, I may have forgotten. So if I hear you read again, I may put you in that list too. But reading names, that's the hardest part of scripture reading. And by the way, for scripture reading, I try not to pick spots where you have to read a lot of names. I try not to put you on the spot that way. But anyway, they picked the different individuals, and verse 16, the names were listed, and Moses had them spy out the land. Verse 17, then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. He said, go up this way to the south. He actually told them he didn't have a GPS. Go in the south, go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like. Okay, and then he actually told them what he wanted them to do. See what the land is like. I want you to see whether the people there are strong or weak. Take notes now. He's telling, make a mental note. I want you to tell me are the people strong or weak. I want you to tell me if there's a lot of people or few people. I want you to tell me if the land they live in is good or bad. What's the terrain like? Tell me if there are cities. Are they like camps, or are they like strongholds? Are they kind of like camps scattered out that are not easily defended, or are they like strongholds that are hard to get through? Tell me if the land is rich or poor. Tell me if there are forests there or not. Is it a lot of trees or is it clear cut? Tell me about that. As you get all this information, be of good courage, and by the way, bring back some of the fruit of the land. Not only tell us, but if you have, bring some back. Bring some back and show us what the fruit's like. Because the time of the season was the first ripe of grapes. So verse 21, they went up and spied out the land. Verse 22, they went up from the south. They went in there and they saw all the different people. Verse 23, they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch of the cluster of grapes. He did ask for that. Tell me about the fruit. Tell me about that. So they got the grape, and they carried it on poles between two people. So it was a big cluster, and it took at least two people to carry. And they picked up some pomegranates and figs. And so because they got the grapes there, they call it the Valley of Eshcol, and because that's where the grapes were cut down. Verse 25, they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. So they were up there 40 days. Verse 26, now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and to the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and they showed them the fruit. You ask us for a verbal, we're giving you a verbal reaction. You ask us if we could bring back fruit, we brought back some fruit for you. Here was what they said in verse 27. We went to the land where you sent us, and it truly flows with milk and honey, and look at this fruit. Verse 28, the word nevertheless is where the problem comes in. Because what we're going to see here, and I believe the problem in life is, I almost wanted to bring some notes along about emotional bank accounts. I've given sermons on that. I was going to go back and drag up some of my quotes from emotional bank accounts. It's a concept that was made famous in my life by Stephen Covey. However, he's not the only one who talked about emotional bank accounts. A lot of people talked about emotional bank accounts. Sometimes I bring up the concept of emotional bank accounts in a wedding. When I actually do a wedding, I introduce that in part of the ceremony. Because an emotional bank account, you know what a financial bank account is. You put money in, you take money out. And contrary to the way politicians work, of both parties, who create great debt, they get to create great debt at our expense and really at the expense of our grandchildren. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to do that. We are supposed to live within our means. We are supposed to put more money into the bank than we take out of the bank. We've all taught our children that. I know I'm not an aggressive investor, so I did not teach my boys to be aggressive investors. Some of you have taught your kids to be good investors, and that's good. Sometimes you do take some chances, but you take some educated chances on good information. I'm just saying personally, I'm not a great investor. I was taught to live within my means. I was taught to save, but I really wasn't taught to invest. And so I had to learn that later in life. And so again, people sometimes in the congregation will ask me for financial advice. And I'm happy to give some of my financial advice, but many times I direct them to people with more training than I am, especially in the area of investments. That's just not my strength. And we need to play to our strength. We need to do to our strength. So we need to give information. But anyway, the emotional bank account is, just like finances, if you put physical money in, you have to have physical money come out, you have a limit. The emotional bank account's the same way. And whether or not you like Stephen Covey's discussion of it, or whether you even like my discussion of it, it's so true in your life that you may see it in other terms, but it's so true in your life. The people you get along with, okay, in other words, with my wife, thankfully my wife, I've made enough deposits in her emotional life that when I make a withdrawal, it doesn't wipe out the bank account. She doesn't hate me forever if I do something stupid. I have family members that I've made enough deposits in the emotional bank account that if I pull something out, they don't hate me forever. Probably most of you in this room here, if not all of you, and maybe even all the people who are listening who I have a relationship with, I've put enough in the emotional bank account that they put up with my mistakes. They put up with my poor jokes. They may put up with my wrong impression or whatever. And likewise, I can put up with theirs too, because that's what relationships are based on. Unfortunately, there are people in this life that I have made deposits from them emotionally, withdrawals from them emotionally, and I don't have a budding relationship with them anymore. Because I may have tried to put some things in, but maybe I took some things out, and thereby, them toward me or me toward them, it becomes a lack of trust. And when there's a lack of trust, a lot of times relationships fracture. Now that's true in marriages, it's true in friendships, it's true in business relationships. It's you, and not only if you're in business with someone, but even when you do business with someone, how people treat each other is very, very important. So we call it an emotional bank account. I didn't coin the phrase. I love to quote the phrase. I love to quote the concept. That again, I remember a time I was out in Phoenix, and I was at building bridges. They used to have building bridges. It was a very popular thing in the 1960s. After many of us came out of a church environment, was building bridges, and they tried to bring people together from different groups to work together. It worked well for a while, but groups started settling into their own establishments again, and it really didn't last a long time. But the first time I went to Phoenix, I went out there, and they didn't know me really well, so they were, in the question and answer, they were a little bit rough on me, but nothing bad. The second time I went out there, I gave a presentation on the unpardonable sin, and I gave my perspective about the unpardonable sin. Afterwards, some of my friends said to me, they said, "Are you aware there's about 7 couples here who don't believe in the unpardonable sin? There's about 7 couples here who believe everyone's going to be saved. Were you aware of that?" I said, "No." And not one of those 7 couples grilled me in the Q&A. And you know why? They liked me. They liked me, and they thought, from their point of view, Dave's just wrong about that. So they patted me on the top of my little head figuratively and just thought, he's a nice guy. Someday he'll understand that. Someday he'll see it. And my opinion of that is, that's pretty polite of them. I think that's really mature of them, growing up. Instead of having to fight with me because they had a difference of opinion, they like me. So again, as you get into like someone, if you do enough positive things for people, then you're able to work through some of their negatives, some of their mistakes. And again, don't spill all your beans about your marriage to everybody, but you can talk about how this has worked and how it's not worked. You can talk about how you've done good things, and next thing you know, when you make mistakes, your mate cuts you a lot of slack. And you can talk about times when your mate wasn't cutting you some slack, and you probably helped influence his or her reaction to what happened here. Now, I bring that up here because that's very important. But I think this even goes a step further. Back to Numbers 13, this goes back a step further. Not only are we talking about the emotional bank account, I'm talking about the order in how you view life. The order in how you analyze life. Because they made the mistake of looking at the good things first. Okay, it's kind of like, let's look at a situation. You're on your job and you're talking to someone, and if they say, give me an evaluation of my job performance. They say, well, first of all, I want to say to you that you dressed well, but you're rude, you're late, you're inconsiderate, you're sloppy work, you're not thorough, and you know what? Really, you turn a lot of our customers off. Well, obviously, the weight of those comments about being, it's different. But even the order is very important. Many times, like in Toastmasters or a Spokesman's Club kind of setting, a lot of times they'll do a positive, negative, positive, which there's a lot of wisdom to that. But they didn't do that here. They just said, you know what? This fruit is really, really nice. They had the order backwards. But, look, verse 28, the people who dwell in the land, they're really strong. Their cities are large and fortified. We saw the descendants of Anak. which we're going to see later were giants. They were huge people. It's kind of like when I forget how long ago it was. I like to make my parlay up to New York City through the years. By the way, I'm not so sure I'm ever going to do that again. My time up in New York City may be a thing of the past. We'll just see how I size things up through the years. But I would go up to Pennsylvania to see my family, and my parents lived 2 hours away from New York City. So I would travel to New York City, and one time I watched a New York Knicks game, and many times I would go see a Broadway show. So that was a very common thing for me to do. I was able to take Danae and Diana up there. I was able to take Jonathan up there, and so I've been able to take them to see a Broadway show, one like we picked that I thought they would like. But one day I was on the cell phone to my wife, talking to my wife, and it hit me out of the blue. I don't know how old I was at the time, 50-something. I looked around and said, hey, everybody up here is as short as me. And it just hit me. All those years, again, this is a generalization. I don't mean nothing offensive by height. I'm a lack of height person, and if you're a lack of height person, it's not an insult. But I realized I grew up around a lot of Jewish people and Italian people and many people who were short. That's all nationalities. Many people were shorter. And it just hit me when I looked around. I thought, well, look how short everybody was. And so it seems, and there are tall people up in the north. New York City's got millions of people. There's tall people there. But there's a high percentage of shorter people. Down in Texas, there's a high percentage of taller people. That's all I'm saying. And so again, they looked around and say the children of Anak were tall. And the Amalekites were in the south. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites were up in the mountains. The Canaanites were down by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. In verse 30, Caleb saw where it was going. Caleb saw where it was going. He says, wait a second, guys. Yes, you're giving information. Yes, you're even giving information that was asked for, that was requested. But he quieted the people before Moses. Whoa, 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 whoa. You guys giving a report, could you slow down? You people hearing the report are having a negative reaction. You're having an emotional reaction here. Calm down. Let's go now. Let's take possession now. Because we can do this. All those obstacles you said, which are true, we were supposed to go up to give a true representation. It's true, but it shouldn't stop us from what we need to do here. But the men who had gone up, they didn't want to have anything of that positive. No, we can't go up against the people. They're stronger than we are. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out. The land through which we have gone as spies will devour the inhabitants. And the people whom we saw are men of great stature. We saw the giants because the descendants of Anak were giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. We're small. And more importantly, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. We cannot do this. And the lesson we're going to see here, to me, is a very important lesson, is not only do we care about the emotional bank account of what we say and how we say it, I'm telling you, friends, this is a truth that comes not from me, but comes from the book of Numbers. It's just something I like to talk about because I think it's so true. The order in which we present something is very, very important. Because while we want to recognize negative, we want to dwell on positive. See, because I think there's two extremes on that. There are some people who recognize all they see is negative, and they never get to the positive. And that's obviously a huge problem. That's what we're talking about here. But there are other people who focus so much on positive that they don't recognize the negative. And why don't you turn over to Luke chapter 14, the Count the Cost chapter. Luke chapter 14. While you're turning there, I'm going to read a few scriptures in Numbers 14. If you're turning to Luke 14. If you see, because I'm going to read to you Luke 14, verse 6. I'm assuming Numbers 14, verse 6. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb, they tore their clothes off when they saw the reaction of the people. They recognized this reaction was so bad. In verse 7, they said, the land we went through to spy out is a good land, verse 7. Verse 8, the Lord delights in us, and he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Please do not rebel against the Lord. Don't fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them. The Lord is with us. Don't be afraid. So again, Joshua and Caleb were the only ones of the spies, as far as I can see, that gave the positive report. But I ask you to turn to Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14. Because that, to me, is the lesson of Numbers 13. It's the order in which you do things. The emphasis, the priority, what you spend what your focus is. And here in Luke 14, it's the count the cost chapter. Because the count the cost chapter, we have to recognize negative. Now, obviously, being consumed by negative is destructive. It's hurtful to the person. It's hurtful to the people around them. Again, to a relationship. If you focus only on the negative of the person you're trying to have a relationship with, you really won't have a relationship. And you say, well, that takes forgiveness. Of course it takes forgiveness. That's one of the hardest things to do. But again, when we can recognize it, we tell people that counting the cost. When you buy a car, when I help people buy cars, I want them to recognize the negative on that car. Then, before it's all over, we're going to focus on both positive and negative, and hopefully we can dwell on the positive. If the positive wins out, you buy that car. And so a lot of times I have some mechanic friends, and many times we'll take the car to the mechanic, we'll put it up on the rack, and I want the mechanic to tell me exactly what he sees. I want him to tell me his opinion, because I'm the one, or the other person's the one making the decision, not him. But I have my mechanic friends, they'll put the car up in the rack. As soon as the car's up in the rack, they say, I would not buy this car. Now, I may still buy it, or my friend may still buy it, but I want to hear his opinion. I don't want him to hear all the good things about it. I see that, although he'll tell me, I think your shocks are good, or this, that, your tire wear, this, that. I want to hear it. I want to hear it, because if I'm going to invest money in buying that car, I want to know. Well, the same thing true is when you marry somebody. When you marry somebody, you want to see what that person's really like. Now you say, well, when you get married young, a lot of times you don't see that person, and people do change, by the way. We all change, especially there's factors why we change. And I will say, I've said this among Church of God people, so you've heard me say this before. There's a policy that many Church of God people have that I don't like the policy, but I understand the wisdom of it. Let me explain. Some churches of God they will tell the man, you cannot propose to the wife, to your fiance, your fiance, until you do counseling. Well, I really don't like that, having that as a rule, but I see the wisdom of that. Because, to be honest, you know what? When people come to me for pre-marriage counseling, you know what they come for? They say, we're already engaged, we'd like you to do the wedding, and now would you counsel us? Well, I'll do it. And I'm supposed to be a trained, experienced counselor, but it is harder at that point once they've already have the ring. It is harder, but I have my work cut out for me, and if any of you are doing pre-marriage counseling, you'll have your work cut out for you if they've already become engaged. So I understand why the churches say that. I just don't like that kind of rule. To me, it's nice if the couple by themselves say, Dave, Mr. Havir, whatever they call me, I'd like you to would like you to counsel us, and I'm thinking about getting engaged. Now, of course, at that point, I'd say, well, hold off just a second. Let's do some talking before you get engaged. But most of the time, I'm being real honest with you, most of the time they're already engaged when they come to you, and it's harder. It is harder, but we have to do it. But the thing is, you want to know the worst thing about that individual. You want to know the worst thing about that individual, because you already know what he or she looks like. You already know how kind he or she is. You already know if he or she's a good worker. All those good traits you like, you want to see, but you want to know the worst. When I buy a car, I want to know the worst thing about the car. I want to know if the car's been in water damage. I want to know if it had hail damage. I may still buy it anyway, at the right price. But I want to know the worst thing about that car. And thankfully, even my wife, we were able to get to know each other. One thing I did, it's no big deal, but one thing I did, I gave up my senior trip at the college Pam and I went to. I knew that I worked for the president of the college for a couple weeks before I graduated, and the president at the time was Ron Dart, and I worked for Ron Dart, and I went up to Ron Dart and I said, "Mr. Dart, can I skip the senior trip? Can I go spend a week with my wife's family out in West Texas?" And he said yes, thankfully, and so I skipped my senior trip. Some people thought I would ever regret that. I never ever regretted it a day in my life. That's just the way we were wired, and I got to spend a week not only with my wife, right before we were married, but I got to spend it with her family as well. Because I wanted to know what I was getting into here. I want to know the worst about it. Now, many times in some situations, you can't know everything and you get big surprises later. I get that. But the point I'm saying is, it is wise to count the cost. It is wise if you're building a house, as the Cartwrights are building their house. They want to analyze what could go wrong. Well, let's look at verse 28. "For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first to count the cost, whether you have enough to do it? Lest after you laid the foundation, you're not able to finish it." And unfortunately, people can mock those kind of things. Maybe they're too kind to mock us to our face, but they may be mocking us in our mind, or they may be mocking us on the internet or Facebook, or they may be mocking us wherever. The point is, we have to be able to withstand the mocking, but the point is, we don't want to put ourselves in position to be mocked. If you're a king, you're going to war against another king, do you not sit down first into whether or not you have enough men? Do you have enough supplies? Do you know the terrain? Of course, back then in World War II, if you look up the documentaries, they looked up the terrain. Now with so much being fought by drones, sometimes they have to analyze it differently than they did back then. As weapons become more modern, the analysis becomes different. But still, you have to analyze, do you want to go into a war? Real quick break comment. Many people were okay with the war going into Iraq, the United States doing that, but many people now complain they didn't want to stay there forever and ever. And they didn't want to stay in Afghanistan forever and ever. Of course, those are tough calls made by people. Just saying it, you try to analyze those things. You know, China right now is a big threat. China is pushing on the United States, but they're going to have to, both sides are going to have to count the cost. Do you really want to start firing at each other? You want to count the cost? Even internal rest of the countries, whether it be the United States or whether it be over in Beirut, as a city, whatever country, you have to count the cost. Do you really want to escalate your unhappiness? Do you really want to escalate how you're sizing things up? You just got to count the cost. And even now, as different governors and mayors and even the president, they try to analyze how to deal with protesters. How are you going to deal with those protesters? Do you really want to escalate it? Not only are you going to fight the different politicians on either side, you're going to have to fight with the media, you're going to have to fight with Twitter, you're going to have to fight with Facebook, as people are going to analyze what choice you make. I'm sure there were some lone wolves out there who were hoping President Trump would have another Kent State, because that really was, that'd be a horrible situation. So all of these people have horrible decisions to make. Police chiefs have horrible decisions to make. Mayors and governors have horrible decisions to make. Governors, presidents, Congress, they have horrible decisions to make. They're trying to count the cost in a horrible situation. And so obviously they're not going to make everybody happy, and sometimes they're not even making themselves happy because they have to go against their gut reaction, or they have to go against their view of common sense because they have to count the cost. The point is, all of us need to count the cost. It's a very important thing to do. Or verse 32, or else while the other is still a great way off, you send a delegation and ask for conditions of peace. Of course, when you ask for conditions of peace, Normally you want to ask them at the appropriate time, who has the upper hand and who's going to get the best deal. Can there be a win-win deal? All that comes into play. Jesus is saying that's what it's like being a Christian. Being a Christian, you have to count the cost. I'm telling you, friends, Christians, before they even start the process, have to recognize negative. But remember, what we're saying is we want to recognize the negative, look at the promises, and then we focus and we dwell on the positive. That's what we try to do as speakers. All of us as speakers try to follow the biblical model. The biblical model is there's captivity ahead, there's bad times, but there is restoration. And I would love for you to go back and, if you want to, listen to my old sermons. Because my goal is, yes, I want to point out negative things, but we do want to end positive. To me, it's very important that we end positive. And so that's again, I'm trying to imitate what Christ would do here. But I personally, and you personally, we want all of us to recognize the negative, but not to dwell on it, not to be consumed by it, because being consumed by it can cause fear. It can cause bad reactions. It can cause bad priorities. But as we recognize it, then we want to dwell on the positive. So we count the cost I have on the handout. Will you be a disciple of Jesus Christ? What does he expect? What were his instructions? What was his example? What obstacles did he face? What obstacles will you face or might you face? What help did he receive? And do you have access to that same help? Again, taking you back to the thought of Numbers chapter 13. They had it backwards. They didn't focus on the promises. They didn't focus on the kingdom, the future, the land that they were going to inherit. They did not focus on that. They got overwhelmed by the real challenges of life, the reality of life, not made up things, the real things. And so, brethren, I'm hoping we can learn from the Numbers 13 example, mixing it in with the Count the Cost chapter of Jesus Christ. We don't want to make the mistake they did. Oh yeah, the fruit looks good, but we can't do it. Friends, please do not fall into that kind of thinking. Please learn from the mistakes of the children of Israel back in Numbers 13. Let's be like Caleb and Joshua to realize, yeah, we see how tough it is. Yeah, we'll have a tough time with it. Yeah, it's going to be tough because our eyes are wide open. We're not ignorant of what's going on. We know what's ahead of us, but we can do it with the help of God. We can do it with the power of God. We can do it because God's will is for us to have this if we just submit ourselves to him. If you bow your heads, we'll ask God's dismissal. Our loving Father in heaven, Father, thank you so much for the peace of mind you give us, the strength of mind you give us. Father, you help us look at things, but we can look at things through a lens of hope. We can look at things through a lens of faith. We can look through a lens of certainty. Father, the trials are real. When we see the struggles that people have, we see that some of your people died by following you. Some people became imprisoned because of following you. Some people became poor because of following you. But as we recognize those things, that's not where we want to stop. We want to realize that you gave promises, you made promises in our life, you committed yourself to us. And if we just do our little bit, that you will do the rest, because we really can do all things through you who strengthen us. But so, Father, help us be alert, help us be wise, help us be watchful. But Father, let us have our hope and trust in you. Let us have our faith in you, because faith and hope and love are those things. All those things are going to survive. Those things are going to abide forever because of your great commitment to us. So, Father, thank you for the chance to look at your word today in this little lesson from Numbers chapter 13. We ask your dismissal. We ask your blessing on the snacks today, and we look forward to the church service. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.